great to be with you for these few weeks that we will be together. I know that Rosemary also has some announcements as well.
Yeah, this is an opportunity for any announcements from the community. If there are events that you want to highlight or put a pin in it somehow. The things that I would have a personal, there's many things that are happening over the month of October and later this month in September. So I know Margaret's going to have something, but I would encourage folks to use the Sign Up Genius and sign up for coffee hour so that we have some sense a little bit in advance. If you know you're going to be in town, you can do it. It's really pretty simple, and let me tell you how simple it can be. You can tell Felicia, don't make the coffee, and you can grab a box of Joe at Dunkin' Donuts and buy some cookies and you're done. So I would encourage you to do that, Simon. Margaret?
Just wanted to remind everybody that Open Door is this Thursday, so I'll be sending an email out to people who've already volunteered, and many of them are in this room right now. We won't have a stove or an oven, so that's exciting, and we'll figure out how to work around that. But if anybody else wants to be involved, just to serve or to, to provide companionship to the people who are attending, we'd love to see you there. Thank you.
Are there any other announcements? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Margaret and Rosemary. So this morning we're going to start the first of a series of 3 sermons on faith, hope, and love. And this morning as we reflect on faith together, it is a very particular kind of faith. It is that faith that we find in ourselves as a result of being in community. So I invite you to reflect on that faith you might find deep down within as we gather together in community. First hymn this morning is Morning Has Broken, although as I look outside, maybe we should sing Morning Is Breaking. We're not quite there yet. Morning Has Broken, number 38 in your gray hymn. Please Let us join together in our covenant, which you can find in your bulletin. In the love of truth and in the Spirit of Jesus, we unite for the worship of God and the service of all.
Our first reading this morning is from Mark, chapter 4, verses 35 through 41. It's the story about him stilling the storm. On that day, when evening had come, he said to them, "Let us go across to the other side." And leaving the crowd behind, they took him with them in the boat, just as he was. Other boats were with him. A great windstorm arose, and the waves beat into the boat so that the boat was already being swamped. But he was in the stern, asleep on the cushion, and they woke him up and said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" He woke up and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Peace, be still." Then the wind ceased, and there was a dead calm. He said to them, "Why are you afraid? Have you still no faith?" And they were filled with great awe and said to one another, "Who then is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him?" Our second reading today is from Stubborn Grace, a memoir by Kate Landis, who's an ordained minister in the UUA. For me, God is the relationship between living creatures. How I treat you, how you treat me. This is the God who is always developing, always changing. The God of process theology, of cause and effect. The God who dwells among us anywhere there is life and nowhere there is not. I feel God's presence best in the wild places, along the shore, on dirt paths. So I call out to this God, what should we do? What can we do?
Thank you, Rosemary. Let's begin our time in a moment of quiet reflection. All-encompassing and pervasive love. We ask that you shine light on our needs, on the needs of our neighbors. Shine light on those things resting on our hearts. We ask that you shine light even on those things deep down in our hearts, down too deep in those places too deep for words. And for those times that we do not have words to say, we recall that we were taught a prayer given to us that we say together now. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever and ever. Amen. Now is the time for our offering, friends. Free gifts for a free church. freely given to build up this community. Thank you. We'll get the choreography right, I promise. We've got a couple weeks. Our responsive reading comes from the back of your gray hymnal number 668, Faith Cannot Save. What good is it, my siblings, if you say you have faith but do not have works? Can faith save you? If a brother or sister is naked and lacks daily food, and one of you says to them, "Go in peace, keep warm and eat your fill,"
and yet you do not supply their bodily needs, what is the good of that?
So faith by itself, if it has no works, is dead.
Show me your faith apart from your works, and I by my works will show you my faith.
Our hymn is We'll Build Land number 121 in your gray hymn. This morning, we not only begin our time together during Adam's sabbatical coverage, but we begin a series of 3 sermons. I began a series of 3 sermons. Don't worry, none of you have to preach, or at least one of you might be preaching, but we'll get there. A series of 3 sermons on faith, hope, and love. Today we explore the notion of faith using the story of Jesus calming the storm that Rosemary read for us, as well as the excerpt from one of my seminary friends, Kate Landis. So not only is this the beginning of the sermon series, these 3 sermons, but it's your first opportunity to get to know me, and I'll do my best not to let you down. So with that in mind, 2 quick stories and a few thoughts. Story number 1. This story from Mark, the one that Rosemary read, was the first story I ever memorized, word for word, at the ripe old age of 6 years old. Why, might you ask, did I memorize a Bible story at 6 years old? At the time, my father was the president of the International Network of Biblical Storytellers. In 1982, he was responsible for coordinating the annual convention of this network. And not only that, he was scheduled to tell the final story on the final night of this week-long event. So after months of meticulous preparations on his part, the convention week was nearly upon us, and my family packed our little station wagon in Philadelphia to make the drive up to Biddeford, Maine, where the convention would be held. As we packed the car, well, let's be honest, as my parents packed the car, I looked on as my dad seemed to run through his mental checklist for the event. And then I saw a flush in his face. A far-off look, that 1,000-mile stare. And then finally, panic. You see, in the midst of all the preparations, he had completely forgotten to learn his own story. This story from Mark. The exclamation point on this event of storytelling on the final night. So as my mom and I settled into the car, he quickly scribbled the verses on 3x5 index cards and taped them to the steering wheel. And we set off for Biddeford, Maine. And for the 10-hour drive, you see where this is going? For the 10-hour drive from Philadelphia to Midcoast, Maine, I heard this story over and over and over and over. And by the time we drove into the parking lot of the convention center, the sponge that was my 6-year-old brain had completely memorized this story word for word. And as we sat in the car and storytellers from around the world were arriving, I tapped my dad on the shoulder from the back seat. And I said, I could help you tell the story. And without missing a beat, he responded, how about this? I'll tell the story, you do the sound effects. Sound effects. Thought my 6-year-old self, I got this, no problem. The convention went off without a hitch. If you're familiar with Myers-Briggs personality testing, you'll appreciate that our entire household is made up of J's, my dad being the greatest J among us, so his planning paid off. And we witnessed some of the best storytelling I've ever heard in my life, even to this day. The final night came, and it was our turn to ascend the stage. My dad stood with a microphone at the front. I sat on a small stool with a microphone at the back, and he began the story. And when he reached the part that says, "And the winds rose up," I very dutifully blew into the microphone. And he said, "And the waves began to crash, and the booming and crashing began in earnest." And something very interesting happened in that moment. As my dad, telling the final story on the final night of this week-long international event, looked out at the audience, he realized that not a single person was looking at him. They were all looking past him at the 6-year-old, putting as much dramatic emphasis as he possibly could into the noises of the passing storm. The complete lack of the audience's attention threw my dad such a curveball, and his line of thinking was thrown off, and he became confused, and then the panic set in again. He looked at me, he looked at the audience, and then he threw up his shoulders and said sheepishly, "I forget the rest of the story." He ran to the back of the stage, picked me up under an arm, and ran off stage, carrying me behind the curtain. Now, I have to be honest with you that I found myself in a certain kind of storm in that moment that I can still feel in my stomach when I think about it. A metaphorical storm of shame. We had just run off stage in front of an entire convention hall filled with storytellers. And I felt the hot tears of humiliation begin to burn my face. But then we heard one person begin to clap. And then another, and then a half a dozen. And soon, my dad and I, after having run off stage, mid-story, received the only standing ovation of the entire event. And my dad pulled back the curtain and he pointed out. And he said, "They're clapping for you. My son, peace. Be still." Because of these words from my father and the response of the gathered community, my personal storm of shame passed. And I experienced a peace that defies explanation or description. Story number 2. Fast forward 10 years, it's now 1992, and we've moved from Philadelphia to Port Clyde, Maine, a small fishing village on the coast. My best friend was Jeremy Davis, and Jeremy's father was a lobsterman in Port Clyde, and Jeremy and I spent much of our time on the water together. And you may remember that in 1992, Hurricane Andrew managed to make its way all the way up the East Coast and wreaked havoc on our coastline in a way we hadn't seen for quite some time in New England. The day after the hurricane came through Port Clyde, Jeremy called and said, "Hey, let's take my dad's skiff up the shoreline and look for stuff washed up by the hurricane. The best stuff washes up on shore after storms." Now, I might have been living in Maine then, but I was from Philadelphia, and I didn't know that in fact, just because the storm had passed, did not mean that the swells in the harbor were still quite large. So I said, sure, sounds like a plan. Jeremy and I go down to the wharf. We not only see signs of debris, but I realize for the first time that there are still 9-foot swells in the harbor, and we're about to get in a 12-foot skiff. I was about to say, nobody tell my mom, but my mom is watching, so. Not only do I very quickly realize that the green swells are coming over the front of the skiff, but I also realize we're not tracking the shoreline at all. We're headed out past the opening of the harbor, into the open ocean, toward a small uninhabited island where Jeremy is absolutely positive we'll find the best stuff. Don't worry, man, I got you, Jeremy said. Eventually, we make it to the island and realize the only safe way to get out of the skiff is to pull into a little cove sheltered from the waves and beach the boat, which we did. And Jeremy was right. The island was full of what my 1992 self thought was treasure. So we loaded the skiff, but as we loaded it, distracted by all the treasure around us, we failed to realize that the tide was coming in and that our little cove was quickly becoming less and less of a cove and more of the general beach line of the island. Suddenly, Jeremy seemed to realize what was happening and hurried us to the skiff, but the waves were already knocking it further and further up the beach, and Jeremy explained, look, you take that oar and you keep us perpendicular to the beach, and I'll get the motor started and back us out. If we go parallel to the shore, the waves will capsize the boat, and if we turn around, the propeller will get buried in the sand. Don't worry, man, Jeremy said, I got you. But keep us perpendicular to the shore. I'm from Philadelphia. I have no idea. So I just took the oar. I dutifully take that oar. I do my best to push, but as I do, and before Jeremy gets the outboard started, a wave comes in at an angle, hits the skiff. I lose my balance, fall backwards with the oar, hit Jeremy across the head, and knock him unconscious in the back of the boat. And there I was, literally in a storm this time, in a boat, in the ocean, alone and terrified. So I right myself, begin yelling Jeremy's name and try my best to keep the skiff right side up, and eventually a cold blast of water hits Jeremy's face. He sits back up, shakes his head, starts the motor, pulls us out away from the island. And after a few fisherman-friendly, but not church-friendly words from Jeremy, after knocking him unconscious, he finally realized how terrified I was. And said, I told you. I got you. I got you. We're fine. And we made our way back to the harbor. A metaphorical storm of shame and humiliation and a literal storm of hurricane-churned waters. A father who offers reassuring words, an empathetic and an encouraging audience, and a friend that says again and again, don't worry, I got you. What does any of this have to do with faith? If you look carefully at the passage this morning that Rosemary read, after calming the storm, Jesus asks the disciples, have you still no faith? Now, this word faith in this context is interesting. In other instances, when it's used in the original Greek in reference to faith in God or faith in Jesus' divinity, that word faith is accompanied by another Greek phrase that makes it clear Jesus or the author is referring to a faith that is on the accord of a greater, higher power. But that accompanying word is absent from this passage. So, is Jesus asking the disciples, have you no faith in God to save you? Or, after seeing me perform miracles, have you still no faith in my power? The answer is no to both of those questions. It doesn't appear that he's talking about either of them. Keep in mind that he's addressing a bunch of fishermen, right? He's addressing a bunch of fishermen who have likely grown up on the Sea of Galilee and certainly navigated their fair share of storms. I think what Jesus is really asking is, after everything you've been through together, have you still no faith in each other, in yourselves, in what you're capable of doing when you come together? If we trust the people with whom we are in community, as I trusted my dad, and we trust that members of that community are capable of fulfilling the roles to make the community a better place, like Jeremy, then that is a kind of faith, isn't it? And as we continue to navigate this pandemic and the racial reckoning that is finally beginning to take course, we come to terms with this environmental emergency we find ourselves in. We have both a personal responsibility and the need to have faith in those with whom we share community in order to do work that is on this magnitude. It's a difficult season, a hurricane season, where a perfect storm of mistrust and social media echo chambers and division are tearing us apart in so many ways. So we have an opportunity, many opportunities, to be the ones who have faith in each other, to respond and to believe when we exclaim, "Peace, be still. I got you. We got you. Peace, be still." May it be so. Let us join our voices together in song singing "Winds, Be Still," number 83 in the Gray Hymn. moments that we have shared, you, friends, have experienced a peace that passes all understanding. And as you exit these doors, you take that peace with you and you spread